Hello everybody, welcome back to Tomorrow and Still. And okay, this is gonna be a bit of a shorter video and a bit of a more random video and a little bit less structured because I need to rant a little bit because I think I found a new favorite author, possibly. A new infatuation. Like, Faulkner will always be my favorite author ever, but I got a new one, like, I think it's rounding out my top 3 of Faulkner, Toni Morrison, and now, the new edition, Orhan Pamuk. I need to talk about this dude because I'm almost done with Snow. I have read My Name is Red, and then next up I'm gonna read The Museum of Innocence. Make sure that receipt doesn't have anything in it. Just double checking that receipt didn't have any text on it. That was important. But I need to talk about this author because his work is blowing me away right now. And yeah, so let's talk about it. Okay, so I was first introduced to Orhan Pamuk through a literature class I had to take for school, right? I'm a college student. I'm doing a major in computer science with a minor in Chinese. And, you know, I have to take a couple of, like, liberal arts classes just to round out my major. My college is very good about that. But so one of the choices I had was a contemporary global literature class. And so we did a whole bunch of different literature from different countries and different eras. It was all modern. I think the earliest we did like We by Evgeny Zamyatin. We did The Bell Jar. We did The Sound of the Fury. And then our last book that we read was My Name is Red. So Orhan Pamuk is a Turkish novelist, and he's very famous in the Turkish-speaking world, just because of how good his novels are, but also how controversial they are. They are very politically charged. They are incredibly politically charged novels. But like, yeah, so that means he's criticizing the Turkish state and just the Middle East in general. And he does a lot of criticisms of Islam too, which I cannot imagine the hot water that gets him in. At least in the books that I've read by him. I've only read 2. But from what I know, he does a lot of, so far he's done a lot of criticism of both the Turkish society, the Turkish state, and a good attack on Islam here and there. Well, not an attack, but like a criticism. So yeah, so I read My Name is Red. This was the final book of the class that we had to read, and it was a really good book to wrap the entire class up because it was the most complex novel that we had to read. It was the longest novel. My copy of this book is just over 400 pages long, and it's got pretty small printing. So it is a pretty chunky book, but it is incredibly complex, and the themes are so all over the place, which we'll get into in a bit. But then after this, I was doing a project for a different class, and I came across discussions of the Museum of Innocence, about how this is about voyeurism, and also how the fact that it's turned into an actual museum that existed in Istanbul, which we'll also get into when I talk about this book and how I'm excited to read this book. But so when I went to pick this book up, because I wanted to read it, it was terribly misprinted. Like the last couple pages of the book the text was like slanted to the side. So if like this is the text, it was like slanted like this. So some of the text was getting cut off by the page and all that stuff. So while I was at my Barnes & Noble, I was like, I'm going to pick up a different book to read by him just while I wait for this copy to come in. And so I picked up, in the meantime, Snow, and I started reading it, and I got hooked instantly. And my entire summer has just kind of been really slow burning my way through this book, which is how you can tell it's a good book, is because I haven't like rushed through it. Like some really good books I've read, I've rushed through, right? Like that's one sign of a good book. But this reminds me a lot of how I read a fable, which I know I won't stop talking about the fucking book, but I swear to God, it's a good book. This reminds me a lot of how I read a fable, right? Where I took 3 months to read that book. This is very similar. Granted, I've also gotten really busy in the middle of reading that book. The fable just legit took 3 months, but I've gotten really busy in the middle of reading this book. But I'm also just taking my time with it because it is so good and so complex It is fascinating. So let's make this at least a little bit structured. Come on, Colin. Okay, let's start talking about My Name is Red. So what is My Name is Red about? It is about, My Name is Red is about 16th century Turkish miniaturists. That's the term, miniaturists. So miniaturists are the people, if you go back and look at like Middle Eastern manuscripts, right? All of these books are decorated with these incredible drawings in the margins of the page, and some pages themselves just have full-on paintings that depict the stories and things being told in the book, right? Miniaturists were the people that did those illuminations, as they're called. And being a miniaturist was a very sacred job, because what Muslims believed at the time was painting was pretty much depicting how God saw the world, right? So us humans, we have depth perception. Some things are in the foreground, some things are in the background, right? So the belief at the time was we saw things that were closer to us first, and then things behind us last, right? So that added a natural like order of importance to perceiving things. God doesn't do that. When God looks at the world, he sees everything at the same time, right? And so that's what miniaturists are going to depict, like on the cover here, right? Everything is flat. 16th century illumination is flat, is entirely flat, because God sees everything at the same time. There is no foreground, there is no background. And so because of that, because of the fact that painting was supposed to be a way of depicting how God saw the world, being a miniaturist was a very sacred job. And obviously, because it was sacred, it got tied up into a lot of politics. All that being said, this book, My Name is Red, is about a guy. At the core of the novel is the murder of a guy named Elegant Effendi. Effendi being like the title, I should know this word, honorific, that's it. Effendi being the title of the honorific. The dude's name is just Elegant. But Elegant Effendi is murdered, right? Because what he was doing was he was illuminating a manuscript in the Western style, because at the time, Western artists were playing around with depicting how we humans see the world, how men sees the world, right? So Elegant Effendi was fascinated by the Frankish style, and so wanted to make a manuscript in that style. But some people saw that as blasphemous, as just, wrong. So he was murdered, and he was thrown to the bottom of a well. So the very first chapter of the book is called I Am a Corpse, and it opens with the line, I am nothing but a corpse now, a body at the bottom of a well. Though I drew my last breath long ago and my heart has stopped beating, no one, apart from that vile murderer, knows what's happened to me. So the opening of this book is the guy that got murdered pretty much telling you, the reader, like you, he's talking to you, saying, over the course of this book, you are going to come across a bunch of people that might have murdered me. It's your job as the reader to figure out who it was. And it is the most fascinating hook for a book I have ever come across. And what transpires then is the entire story of a dude named Black who is returning to Istanbul from political exile, which you will a theme in his books. But he's returning to Istanbul from political exile and coming back to reconnect with the love of his life, the love of his childhood again. But he also gets tied up in this political conflict. I'm just now realizing how similar these books are, but that's Pamuk. We'll get to it. But so he gets tied up into this political conflict and this murder mystery pretty much, and figuring out who killed Elegant Effendi, but also why, and also untying and getting involved with this political tension that's rising at the time, because this entire book's theme is liminality. It's being stuck between two states, because at the point that this book takes place in, Istanbul is torn between East and West, right? You have the traditional Eastern ideals and religion and all of that happening that it's already like foundationally stuck in, that Istanbul is already like stuck in. And then it also has the Western influences hitting Turkey at this time, right? Because Turkey is this really interesting, Istanbul especially, is a really interesting geographically located place, because it is kind of the border between the Eastern world and the Western world. And so that's what this book is trying to depict, right? Is this point in time where Istanbul was getting torn, was stuck between not quite being an Eastern country anymore, but not quite being a Western country yet. It never really became a Western country. But the theme of liminality extends so much deeper than just that, because everything in this book, if you pay attention to this book, literally every single page will have an example of some sort of liminality, of being stuck in between two options, two places. Everybody's hanging in between door frames. Is stuck between like decisions. Everybody is neither in one place or the other. It is so fascinating, and I wish I could do motif like this. Like, I like to write, I creatively write sometimes. Dude, I wish I could do motif like this. This is insane. It is literally every single fucking page, and I'm not kidding when I say that. And the very beginning of this book has a bunch of quotes, right? There's a bunch of quotes that Pamuk put at the front. And one of them is from the Quran. It says, "To God belongs the East and the West." And that is the very, very essential theme of this book, is the way that miniaturists were drawing at the time. Yes, is a way that God sees the world, because he also sees it in the French style, in the Frankish style. God is all-knowing and all-seeing and is everything, so he is going to see it, yes, with the traditional Eastern illuminated style, but also every other style imaginable. So, because to God, the East and the West are both belonging to him, right? It's a fascinating novel, so interesting, and very complex, a very complex novel. So I read this, and I was like, okay, good, very good. I want to read more. This is fascinating, because I heard really good things about Museum of Innocence, then picked up a copy. It was weird, so I got Snow instead. This book is about a poet named Ka returning to Istanbul from political exile to reconnect with the love of his life before getting swept up in a political conflict. Sound familiar? So this brings up a really interesting thing about Pamuk as an author. Is one of his major things across all of his work, a lot of his major themes across a lot of his works, is metatextuality and intertextuality. Words. So like this book has a direct reference to this book by name, like, because so this book, yes, is about Ka returning to Istanbul. Not Istanbul, actually. He returns to Istanbul, and then he goes to the very small conservative townships of Batman and Kars. And then that's where he gets stuck in there and gets swept up into this political intrigue plot. But this story of Ka is being told by Orhan Pamuk. Like, in the novel, Orhan Pamuk is the person that is telling you the story. Like, he is a character in the story, and he is recounting the tale of Ka to you. It is really weird. It's not a author self-insert technically. It is just the author being a character in the book. It's so weird. But 271 pages into the book, you get a chapter called It's Not Just You I've Lost. It takes place in Frankfurt after Ka has died. Spoilers. So Pamuk is getting his hands on Ka's possessions after he's died. And so what he recalls a conversation that he had with Ka before he died, saying, during one of our last meetings in Istanbul, Ka had asked me for my plans for a new novel, and I had told him about the Museum of Innocence, an idea I was still keeping from everyone. This novel was published, I think, before the Museum of Innocence. Let me double check. This dude is fucking decorated with awards. Holy shit. Yeah. So Snow came out before the Museum of Innocence. So like that, it's weird, right? So I'm not done with this book yet, as you can tell. I have about 100 pages left, but I wanted to record this video before I got into the climax of this book because holy shit, it gets crazy. This book gets insane. So, because I thought the politics in My Name is Red is bad. Dude, this goes nuts. It is insane. So the plot of this book, right, is pretty much the town of Kars and Batman, but mostly Kars, is facing an uptick in suicide in the young female population, right? Women are committing suicide because their lives are shit, pretty much. Young women are being mistreated, and this is all emblemized or symbolized by their by the debate that was happening at the time in the early 1990s about the freedom to wear headscarves, right? Headscarves being hijabs, being like super central to the Islamic faith and all that stuff for women. But Turkey was having this kind of phase of secularism, where, but it was like the French idea of secularism of you cannot be religious in any way. It's not it wasn't that you could American style be whatever religion you want in a public situation. You can swear into office or be under oath under any text that you want. It was the more European idea of you cannot be religious at all in any situation, in any public situation. Like if you're in public office, you could not wear a fez or a hijab. So that was the debate that was happening at the time. And so a lot of these girls that wanted to wear headscarves at school were not being allowed to. And this was, putting their honor at stake and all that stuff. And so that, on top of all of the other problems that women were facing, a lot of young women were committing suicide. And so Ka is going into Kars and Batman to investigate the suicide girls. And what happens is it ends up snowing a lot, like feet and feet and feet of snow, completely closing the roads and trapping Ka in Kars. And so what ends up happening is a military coup ends up happening because an election is just around the corner, and Kars is completely isolated from the outside world. Why not stay? And you have a one dude has power over the military. Why not stage a military coup? And so the entire town is taken over by the military under the command of a guy running a theater troupe that is in town. And so what ends up happening is Ka ends up as this like mediator of being the person bouncing around every single party involved in this conflict. So like he starts with meeting with like the super fundamentalists, the Islamic fundamentalists, and like those guys, and then he bounces to meet the super leftist guys that are running the coup, and then he goes and meets with the police, and then some religious high schoolers, and he starts to see how everybody's involved, right? This super, like, all of these parties are involved with each other in different ways, and it kind of all comes into a head with the scene where they have a meeting in the Hotel Asia, in a random ass room in the Hotel Asia, where everybody is present. to sign a declaration that they want to send to a paper in Germany to announce that Cars is in turmoil like this. Just an announcement to the West that Cars is crazy. Let's get our name out there. Let's make sure that everybody knows what's happening here. That kind of thing. And that's where that all comes to a head. And then there's a passage in there that's freaking gorgeous that I posted on my TikTok. That's where the complexity all comes to a head. And it's an insane book. It is so crazy. So much happens in just the course of a couple of days, because this is all happening during a snowstorm in Cars. So it only lasts for I think I'm like on day 4 or 5 so far, and we are 350 pages in, right? It is so insanely complex, and it's kind of Orhan Pamuk is a very good political writer. And I think what's so interesting about it is because I've never read a political writer that isn't involved in Western politics. This is my first time diving into a political writer that is forcing me to do research. Like, going into this book, I actually had to pause for a second, like the first 50 pages, like, okay, what was the conflict going on at the time? I had to actually do extra research to figure out what the hell the conflict was. Because every other time, like when I'm reading American politically charged writing, I know what the fuck's happening. I know my American history. I know all the shit that happened, right? I don't know shit about Turkey. So this forced me to actually do some research and figure out what the hell Turkey was up to in the early 1990s and why the headscarf thing was such a big deal. It's a different mental exercise, right? Because like, if you're talking about a very politically charged novel, right, from the States, your brain, or as my brain at least, as somebody who's been American, born and raised in America, I can handle all the different parties because I know the political complexities of the time, right? It's like reflex to me. This I cannot do that with. Hold on, T. I don't have that background knowledge. So it's a different kind of mental exercise when you have to deal with all of these different parties, all of these different viewpoints in a conflict about a thing that is completely foreign to you. Because like, I understand the basics of what a hijab means to Muslim women, right? Like I know the very basics, right? But I don't. It's kind of the difference between knowing what a word means in another language and just knowing the word in your native language, because there's a difference between saying it's like saying 中国 is China in Chinese, between saying China. Like, you instantly can like comprehend that word, but then when I say 中国, you have to actually translate that. It's the same thing here with me and a hijab. I understand that what a hijab means to these women, but it's not reflexive because I didn't grow up in Islam. So it's extra hoops of translation that I have to do in my cultural translation. It's not linguistic translation, it's cultural translation that you have to do in your head as a Westerner to read these books. And it's an incredible exercise. And like, I know the value of reading books from outside of your culture, right? It's incredibly important, but I think this book really has hammered home to me how important it is and why it is so important. Is because of that, just alone, that cultural translation that I have to do, stretch my head around why is everyone so angry? Because like, I understand why everyone was so angry in the Civil War, in the American Civil War. I have to stretch my head around the conflict and the politics of this novel in order to comprehend why everybody's so angry. And it's so fascinating. I love it. It is so fun to read. It is so fun to engage with. It is fascinating. And also, Pamuk is kind of metafictional as an author, which I love. I love that. I love metafiction so much. He is such a good author. I love it. I love this so much. Read this book, if anything. My Name is Red is a good book, right? Don't get me wrong, but this book is so freaking good. But the third book that I want to get to is the Museum of Innocence, because this book, okay, so in 2012, quite a while after Pamuk wrote this book, the Museum of Innocence opened in Istanbul. Okay, let me back up. So this book is about this dude named Kemal, and he falls in love with his distant cousin, I want to say. It's weird. That's the point. Before you get weirded out, that's the point. But so he falls in love with his like distant cousin, I think, named Fusun, and he gets so upset. It's not even really love, because he was set to, yeah. So he's about to get engaged with his fiancée Sibel, but before he gets married, he doesn't fall in love with Fusun. He gets obsessed with her. He makes love with her and all that stuff. That's the opening scene of the book. But then he gets so infatuated with her, he starts stealing things from her, but really small things. Like the first thing that he pockets at the very beginning of the book is an earring. And then he starts stealing more and more little small things that are symbolic of every encounter they have had. And so he gets the major theme of this book is voyeurism, right? Of watching from a distance and getting pleasure out of that. It's not inherently sexual. The literary understanding of voyeurism is not always sexual, but in many cases it is. But yeah, so Kemal gets a really weird pleasure out of watching and observing Fusun and not being able to get her, but just seeing her from a distance. And so that's why he collects these little trinkets. And I think that one of the most fascinating parts about this is, so the physical Museum of Innocence opened in 2012, and it is a recreation of all the things that Kemal would have kept from Fusun over the years that they knew each other. And so one of the exhibits in that museum is a wall of cigarette butts. Smoked cigarette butts. An entire ass wall of them. It is so, that's kind of how obsessive Kemal is about Fusun, is he steals every single cigarette butt she smokes that he can get his hands on. He takes them and keeps them. It is weird, but that's the gist of the novel, right? And it's about it's specifically the Istanbul middle class in the 1970s. It takes place in 1975, or starts in 1975, but it's very heavily inspired by Pamuk's own upbringing in the Turkish middle class in Istanbul. And so it feels like another one of that, a different, because this talks about the poor, right? This talks about very, very poor and conservative townships outside of Istanbul, like Kars and Batman. This is inherently about the middle class, about like one of the first scenes of the book is Kemal buying a really expensive bag, and it's a different kind of political charge to it, right? Where Snow is about the poor, this is about a different kind of people that are going to have different political problems. And again, I'm really excited to read it because of how my brain is going to have to stretch around it again, of what is the political state of Turkey that Pamuk is writing about, right? And also, it's just another, like, it's voyeurism. Like, the freaking My Name is Red is so inherently about liminality that it's in every page of this book. I haven't quite identified what Snow's major theme is, but this is about voyeurism. Pamuk is so prolific, is so good at motif and theme that his books feel so cohesive, and they feel like they go by so quickly, even though they are long ass books, like 400 pages, 500 pages, page books. They go by so fast but they're also not easy. It's this weird, like, liminality of sometimes, like, if you think of it one way, it goes by really fast. But if you think of it another way, they're so dense and hard to get through because they're so, like, their plot is so complex. It's just a fascinating way, like, it's such a fascinating thing. And so I'm really excited to read this book to see what complexities Pamuk brings to the table in this like topic. I'm infatuated with him, right? I am infatuated with the works that he's written. He might be my next Faulkner, my next Morrison, right? Where I might want to read every single one of his works because they are so fascinating. And it's great because they're all in translation, right? They are all originally written in Turkish. So that's a little bit extra, like, worldliness, I guess. I don't like that term, but, like, you know, a little bit more. I'm reading fiction in translation, but one of the best, like, authors I have ever read. It is insane. This man, like, I love Faulkner for his writing style, right? Same with Toni Morrison, but Pamuk is more along the lines of Toni Morrison in that he doesn't have a beautiful writing style, but he has technique. He has mechanics down pat. This is the most masterful use of literary theory I have ever come across, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface because like, when I was reading My Name is Red for that class, our class sessions, our discussions about that book got so deep so quick. It is fascinating, and so I'm really excited to keep diving into Pamuk and his works. Anyways, that was supposed to be a shorter video, but it ended up, the recording is 36 minutes long, so this will be interesting to edit down. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm really excited to get more into Pamuk and the other stuff that he's written, and yeah, I will probably report back after I'm done with Snow and some of the other books that I'm reading right now. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. So bye-bye, y'all.